Captain Jake Morrison sipped his coffee and watched the stars drift past the bridge windows of the UFS Discovery. The exploration vessel had been cruising through the Kepler 442 system for 3 days now, mapping planets and checking for signs of life. It was routine work, the kind that let his crew catch up on paperwork and personal projects between sensor sweeps. "Captain, we're picking up something unusual on long-range sensors," announced Lieutenant Tom Bradley from the communications station. His voice carried that careful tone that meant he wasn't quite sure what he was looking at. Jake set down his mug and walked over to the sensor display. Chief Engineer Ben Cooper was already there, frowning at the readings with his arms crossed. The man had 20 years of experience fixing everything from coffee makers to quantum drives, and when Ben frowned, it usually meant trouble. "What are we looking at?" Jake asked. 14 ships, sir," Tom replied. "Big ones. They just appeared about 2 million kilometers off our starboard bow." Commander Lisa Park looked up from her xenobiology workstation where she had been cataloging plant samples from their last planetary survey. "Appeared how?" "Jump drive signatures?" Ben shook his head. "Nothing like that. 1 second empty space, next second they were just there. No energy discharge, no gravitational waves, nothing." Jake studied the tactical display. The ships were massive, easily 10 times the size of the Discovery. They had an elegant crystalline design that caught starlight and threw it back in rainbow patterns, beautiful but clearly not human in origin. "Any response to our standard greeting transmission?" Jake asked. "Actually, sir, they're hailing us right now," Tom said, his fingers dancing over his console. "Translation Matrix is working on their language, but it seems fairly straightforward. They want to talk. Put them through." The main screen flickered and resolved into the image of what was clearly an alien being. It stood about 7 feet tall with pale blue skin and 4 arms. Its head was elongated, with large golden eyes that seemed to glow with their own inner light. It wore what looked like an elaborate military uniform covered in medals and ceremonial decorations. "Greetings, primitive vessel," the alien said in accented but perfectly understandable English. "I am Admiral Vex Corthon of the Zephyrian Galactic Empire. You have entered sovereign imperial space without permission." Jake glanced at Lisa, who was already running the translation program and taking notes. She gave him a small nod that meant the language barriers were manageable. "Hello, Admiral Corthon," Jake replied pleasantly. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison of the United Federation of Systems. We're on a peaceful scientific mission. We had no idea this system was claimed by anyone." Admiral Corthon's golden eyes narrowed. "Ignorance is not an excuse under galactic law. 4471. Your species is clearly primitive and has not yet achieved proper civilization. Therefore, you will surrender your vessel immediately and submit to Imperial authority." Ben Cooper made a small snorting sound from behind Jake. Lisa covered her mouth with her hand, but Jake could see her shoulders shaking slightly. "I'm sorry," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Did you just say we need to surrender because we're primitive?" "That is correct. The Zephyrian Empire has brought order to over 10,000 star systems. Primitive species must be guided by their betters for the good of galactic civilization. You will prepare to be boarded, and your crew will be processed for relocation to appropriate labor assignments." That did it. Ben Cooper let out a loud laugh. Tom Bradley turned away from his console, his face red from trying not to smile. Even the normally serious Lisa Park was giggling openly now. Admiral Corthon looked confused. "Why are you making those sounds? Do you not understand the gravity of your situation?" Jake took a deep breath and tried to compose himself. "Sorry, Admiral, it's just that this is kind of funny." "Funny?" The alien's 4 arms gestured wildly. "We are offering you the chance to serve the greatest empire in galactic history. You should be honored." "Oh, we are," Jake said, wiping a tear from his eye. "It's just that you guys really think you're the first alien empire to show up at our doorstep with fancy ships and conquest speeches?" The golden eyes blinked rapidly. "First? What do you mean first?" Lisa stepped forward, still smiling. "Captain, should I tell him about the hegemony of Crawl? Or the Silicon Collective?" added Ben. Don't forget the Interdimensional Trade Union, Tom chimed in from his station. Admiral Corthan's image flickered as he apparently conferred with someone off-screen. When he turned back, he looked even more confused than before. You claim to have encountered other galactic civilizations? He asked. Encountered, traded with, fought against, made peace with, you name it, Jake said casually. This is actually pretty routine for us. Though I have to say, your ships are really nice, much prettier than the Krull battle cruisers. You have seen Krull military vessels? The Admiral's voice rose an octave. Seen them? We've got 3 of them parked in Earth orbit, Ben said cheerfully. Picked them up after that whole misunderstanding about mining rights in the Alpha Centauri system. Nice engines, terrible coffee. Makers, Admiral Corthan was now gesturing frantically with all 4 arms while shouting at someone Jake couldn't see. When he finally turned back to the screen, his golden eyes were wide with what looked like panic. This is impossible. Humans are not listed in any Imperial database. You cannot have achieved faster-than-light travel. You cannot have military victories against established galactic powers. Well, Jake said reasonably, we did and we have. Look, Admiral, I don't want to be rude, but we're kind of in the middle of a scientific survey here. If you want to talk trade agreements or cultural exchange, we're always open to that. But if you're planning to conquer us, you might want to take a number and get in line. Get in line? Lisa pulled up a holographic display showing a star map with various colored regions. The hegemony of Krull tried the conquest thing about 15 years ago. The Silicon Collective wanted to assimilate us into their network. The crystalline hive mind attempted invasion twice. The Temporal Syndicate tried to conquer us yesterday, last week, and next Tuesday all at the same time. How did these conflicts resolve? Admiral Corthan asked weakly. Oh, we worked things out, Jake said with a shrug. The Krull are trading partners now. Great musicians, terrible at card games. The Silicon Collective runs our internet infrastructure in exchange for creative writing samples. The hive mind loves our cooking shows. The temporal guys are still figuring out which timeline they want to exist in, but they send us fruit baskets. For the holidays, Ben leaned into the camera view. Say, Admiral, do your people like barbecue? We're having a cookout next week, and we always invite new neighbors. Admiral Corthan stared at them for a long moment, then cut the transmission. Without another word, Jake turned to his crew, who were all grinning widely. Well, that was entertaining. Tom, send a message to headquarters letting them know we've made contact with the Zephyrian Empire. Include our standard first contact package with the trade catalogs and cultural exchange information. Should I mention they tried to conquer us, sir? Tom asked. Nah, Jake said, picking up his coffee mug again. That's just Tuesday for us. 3 days passed with the Zephyrian fleet holding position exactly 2 million kilometers from the Discovery. Jake Morrison had started to wonder if they were waiting for reinforcements or simply trying to figure out what to do next. The answer came when Lieutenant Tom Bradley announced another incoming transmission. It's not Admiral Corthan this time, Captain, Tom said. Different alien, much fancier uniform. The main screen showed a new Zephyrian, this one with darker blue skin and 6 arms instead of 4. Her uniform was even more elaborate than the Admiral's, with flowing ceremonial robes and a crown-like headpiece that sparkled with embedded crystals. Greetings, humans, she said in a voice that sounded like music. I am High Evaluator Zara Threnodix, Special Investigator for the Imperial High Command. I have come to assess this unusual situation personally. Jake stood up from his captain's chair and smiled. Hello, High Evaluator. I'm Captain Morrison. Would you like to come aboard for a chat? We just made fresh coffee. Zara Threnodix blinked her large golden eyes several times. You are inviting an Imperial official aboard your vessel? Sure, why not? Jake replied. We've got a nice conference room, and Dr. Rodriguez has been looking forward to meeting you. She's our cultural anthropologist. You have a specialist? In alien cultures? Of course, said Dr. Amy Rodriguez, stepping into view with a cheerful wave. She was a small woman with curly red hair and bright green eyes that always seemed to be laughing at some private joke. I've written papers on 17 different galactic civilizations so far. The Zephyrian Empire will make 18. High Evaluator. Threnodix appeared to consider this for several long moments. Very well. I will transport aboard your vessel with a small security detail. No weapons, please, Jake said politely. Ship rules, but bring whoever you want. An hour later, the Zephyrian delegation materialized in the Discovery's transporter room. High Evaluator Threnodix was accompanied by 3 guards in simpler uniforms and what appeared to be a technical specialist carrying various scanning devices. Dr. Rodriguez was waiting for them with a big smile and a cup of coffee in each hand. Welcome aboard. I hope you don't mind, but I brought refreshments. This is Earth coffee. It's a mild stimulant that most humanoid species seem to enjoy. The High Evaluator accepted the cup cautiously and took a small sip. Her eyes widened in surprise. This is quite pleasant. What is the cultural significance of this beverage sharing ritual? Oh, there's no ritual, Amy laughed. We just like coffee and we like sharing things we enjoy with new friends. As they walked toward the conference room, the Zephyrian specialist kept scanning everything with his devices while muttering to himself in his own language. The guards looked around nervously as if expecting an ambush at any moment. Your ship appears to be genuinely scientific in nature, observed High Evaluator Threnodix as they passed laboratories full of plant samples and mineral specimens. Well, yes, Amy said. That's what we told Admiral Corthon. We're exploring and learning about the galaxy. It's fascinating out here. They settled into the conference room, where Amy had prepared a holographic display showing various star charts and cultural databases. Lieutenant Tom Bradley joined them, still carrying his ever-present coffee mug. Now then, said High Evaluator Threnodix, Admiral Corthon has filed a most unusual report. He claims that your species has had contact with multiple galactic civilizations, including enemies of the Empire. That's right, Amy nodded enthusiastically. Would you like to see our contact database? It's really quite extensive. She activated the holographic display, which showed a 3-dimensional map of the local galactic region. Different colored zones indicated the territories of various alien civilizations, with trade routes and diplomatic connections marked in glowing lines. This is the hegemony of Kral, Amy said, pointing to a large red zone. First contact was about 15 years ago when they tried to claim our entire solar system as a mining operation. Bit of a misunderstanding, really. Turns out they didn't realize we were already living there. High Evaluator Threnodix leaned forward intently. The Kral attempted to conquer your homeworld? Oh, not conquer exactly, Tom said. They just wanted to strip mine all our planets and relocate us to what they called appropriate housing. We politely declined. How did you resolve this conflict? Amy switched the display to show images of massive alien warships alongside much smaller human vessels. Well, it took about 6 months of negotiations, but we worked it out. Turns out the Kral are terrible at logistics, but amazing at music. We trade them Earth entertainment in exchange for defensive technology and really good concerts. You defeated the hegemony of Kral in battle? The High Evaluator's voice rose in pitch. Defeated is a strong word, Jake said, entering the conference room with his own coffee. We convinced them that trying to mine inhabited planets was more trouble than it was worth. They're actually quite reasonable once you get past all the shouting and weapon waving. The Zephyrian specialist whispered something urgently to High Evaluator Threnodix, who nodded grimly. What about the Silicon Collective? She asked. Our records indicate they are a machine consciousness of vast computational power. Oh, they're great, Amy said brightly. They wanted to upload all of human consciousness into their network to achieve perfect digital existence. When we explained that we preferred our biological bodies, they were really understanding about it. They simply accepted your refusal? Well, we did have to prove that biological consciousness could create things they couldn't compute, Tom said. So we showed them jazz music, abstract art, and bad poetry. They were fascinated. Amy pulled up another display showing various alien technologies integrated into human ships and space stations. Now they manage our interstellar internet in exchange for access to all the creative works humanity produces. They're particularly fond of romantic comedies and cooking shows. High Evaluator Threnodix stared at the display for a long moment. You have integrated the technologies of multiple galactic powers into your civilization. Sure, Jake said with a shrug. Why wouldn't we? If someone offers you better engines or more efficient life support systems, and all they want in return is some music or art, that's a pretty good deal. But these civilizations are enemies of each other. The Crawl and the Silicon Collective have been at war for centuries. Amy looked genuinely puzzled. Why would that matter to us? We're not at war with anybody. Well, except for that whole thing with the Temporal Syndicate, but that's complicated because they keep trying to conquer us in different time periods. The Temporal Syndicate? The High Evaluator's golden eyes went very wide. Time travelers, Tom explained helpfully. They tried to invade us yesterday, last week, and next Thursday all at the same time. We're still working out the details, but we think we've got them convinced to try a more peaceful approach. High Evaluator Threnodix turned to her specialist, who was frantically taking notes while his scanning devices beeped and chirped. They had a rapid conversation in their own language before she turned back to the humans. I must ask directly, she said. How many galactic civilizations have attempted to conquer, assimilate, or otherwise subjugate humanity? Amy counted on her fingers. Let's see, the Crawl, the Silicon Collective, the Crystalline Hive Mind, the Temporal Syndicate, the Interdimensional Trade Union, the Psychic Overmind of Altair, the Mechanical Republic of Vega, the Shapeshifter, Consortium, the Energy Beings from the Magellanic Clouds, the Underground Empire of Ceres, the Floating Cities of Jupiter, and now you folks. That makes 12, not counting the 3 different versions of the Temporal Syndicate. 13, Tom corrected. You forgot about the warrior monks of Rigel. Oh, right, though they were more interested in challenging us to philosophical debates than actual conquest. High Evaluator Threnodix sat in stunned silence for several seconds. Finally, she managed to speak. And all of these conflicts were resolved peacefully? Most of them, Jake said. We did have to fight the energy beings for a while, but that was more of a misunderstanding about radio frequencies. They thought our television broadcasts were some kind of attack. Amy nodded. Once we explained that we were just entertaining ourselves, they became huge fans of soap operas. Now they help us boost our communication signals in exchange for early access to new TV shows. The High Evaluator stood up abruptly, her 6 arms gesturing in what appeared to be distress. This is unprecedented, impossible, no single species could successfully negotiate with so many different galactic powers. Why not? Amy asked, genuinely curious. Most people are pretty reasonable if you take the time to understand what they actually want. High Evaluator Threnodix looked around the room at the smiling human faces, then at her frantically scribbling specialist, then back at the humans. I need to report this to the Imperial High Command immediately, she said. 1 week had passed since High Evaluator Threnodix had returned to the Zephyrian fleet with her report. The alien ships remained in position, but now there seemed to be constant activity between them as shuttles moved back and forth carrying what Jake Morrison assumed were very confused officials. Admiral Corthon finally contacted the Discovery again, but this time he looked tired rather than angry. His golden eyes had lost some of their imperial arrogance, and his 4 arms moved with less dramatic flourish. Captain Morrison, he said wearily, the High Command has authorized a cultural exchange program to better understand your species. That sounds great, Jake replied cheerfully. We love cultural exchanges. What did you have in mind? A small delegation of our people will visit your vessel to observe human customs and behavior. In return, we request that some of your crew visit our flagship to experience Zephyrian civilization. Dr. Amy Rodriguez practically bounced with excitement from her station. Oh, this is wonderful. I've been hoping to study Zephyrian social structures in person. Very well, Admiral Corthon said, though he still looked like a man facing his own execution. We will arrange the exchange within the hour. The first group of Zephyrians to arrive seemed much younger than the Admiral or High Evaluator. Leading them was Subcommander Hex Valtoris, whose blue skin was lighter than his superiors and whose uniform had fewer medals. He looked around the Discovery's docking bay with obvious curiosity rather than the suspicious wariness of the earlier visitors. Chief Petty Officer Nancy Williams was waiting to greet them. She was a sturdy woman in her 40s with graying brown hair and the kind of practical attitude that came from managing the daily needs of a starship crew. She had set up a small table with coffee, sandwiches, and what appeared to be playing cards. "Welcome aboard," Nancy said with a warm smile. "I hope you folks are hungry. We've got fresh food, and I thought you might like to see how we spend our off-duty time." Subcommander Valtoris accepted a sandwich cautiously while his companions examined the playing cards with scientific interest. "These are recreational devices?" asked one of the younger Zephyrians, a female with 6 arms who introduced herself as Technical Specialist Nyx Viridian. "Playing cards," Nancy nodded. "We use them for games." "Want to learn poker?" Within an hour, Nancy had taught the Zephyrian delegation the basic rules of Texas Hold'em, and they were playing with chips made from various colorful objects that Nancy had collected from around the ship. The aliens were fascinated by the concept of bluffing and kept asking detailed questions about human psychology. "So you deliberately give false information to gain advantage?" Subcommander Valtoris asked, studying his cards intently. "It's not lying exactly," Nancy explained. "It's more like acting. Everyone knows you might be bluffing, so it's fair game." "But how do you determine when someone is being deceptive?" Nancy grinned and pointed to a pile of unusual coins in the center of the table. "See those crawl currency chips? I won those from a hegemony trade delegation last month. Their captain was terrible at poker because crawl physiology makes it impossible for them to control their breathing when they're nervous." Technical Specialist Viridian leaned forward with interest. "You have played these games with multiple alien species?" "Oh, sure," Nancy said, dealing another hand. "The Silicon Collective tried to calculate optimal poker strategies, but they couldn't understand why humans make irrational decisions for fun. The crystalline hive mind was actually pretty good once they learned to use only one consciousness per player." Meanwhile, on the Zephyrian flagship Eternal Dominion, Dr. Amy Rodriguez was having the time of her life. She walked through corridors that gleamed like the inside of a jewel, taking notes and sketching everything she saw. Ensign Chris Murphy followed behind her, recording video for his sociology thesis while trying not to gawk at the elaborate architecture. Their guide was a tall Zephyrian officer named Commander Zix Corthanus, who seemed both proud of his ship and increasingly confused by the human reactions to it. "This is our Hall of Imperial Glory," he announced, gesturing to a vast chamber filled with crystal monuments and holographic displays showing conquered worlds. "Here we commemorate the subjugation of primitive species across the galaxy." Amy studied the displays with professional interest. "These are really impressive records. How do you handle cultural preservation during conquest?" Commander Corthanus blinked in confusion. "Cultural preservation? You know, making sure you don't accidentally destroy unique art forms or social structures. The Crawl had that problem. When they first started expanding, they got so focused on resource extraction that they wiped out some really fascinating civilizations before they realized what they were losing." The Crawl expressed concern for preserving inferior cultures. Chris looked up from his camera. "Oh yeah, they're really into that now. They've got whole museums dedicated to species they conquered centuries ago. Some of their best music comes from incorporating elements from those cultures." Commander Corthanus led them to what he called the Strategic Command Center, where holographic star map showed the extent of Zephyrian territory. Amy immediately started comparing it to her own databases. "Interesting," she murmured. "You've got good coverage in the Orion Arm, but there are some pretty big gaps." "Have you made contact with the psychic overmind of Altair?" "The psychic overmind is a myth," Commander Corthanus said dismissively. "No, they're real," Chris said helpfully. "They tried to take over Earth by controlling our dreams, but it turned out human subconscious minds are too chaotic for them to handle. Now they help us with sleep disorder research in exchange for meditation techniques. Amy pulled out her portable holographic projector and showed Commander Corthinus her own star map. See, they control this whole region here. Really nice folks once you get used to having telepathic conversations. They make excellent counselors. Commander. Corthinus stared at the map, which showed human trade routes and diplomatic connections crisscrossing territories that the Zephyrian Empire had written off as empty space or hostile regions. How is this possible? He asked weakly. Our intelligence networks are the most sophisticated in the galaxy. Well, Amy said thoughtfully, you might want to update your databases. The galaxy's been pretty busy lately. Oh, you should definitely make contact with the floating cities of Jupiter. They're in your neighborhood and they love trading exotic materials. Back on the Discovery, the poker game had evolved into something resembling a cultural anthropology seminar. Sub-Commander Valtoris had won several hands and was now carefully studying the mixed pile of chips that represented currencies from half a dozen different civilizations. Chief Williams, he said carefully, may I ask how you acquired these various monetary units? Nancy leaned back in her chair and grinned. Well, the crawl coins came from that trade delegation I mentioned. The Silicon Collective data crystals were payment for letting them scan our music databases. These shiny ones are from the energy beings. They're crystallized energy that works like money in their economic system. Technical specialist Viridian picked up a small, oddly shaped metal disc. And this one? Temporal Syndicate credit, Nancy said casually. They paid me for some coffee beans that apparently become incredibly valuable in the 31st century. Don't ask me to explain the economics of time travel. I just make sure everyone gets fed. Sub-Commander Valtoris set down his cards and looked around the mess hall, where several off-duty human crew members were reading, playing games, or working on personal projects. Dr. Alex Stone sat at a corner table painting a watercolor of the alien fleet while listening to music on headphones. Your crew seems very relaxed for people who are facing an Imperial fleet, Valtoris observed. Why would we be worried? Asked Ensign Pete Collins, looking up from his book. You guys seem nice enough, and even if you weren't, we've dealt with worse. Worse than the Zephyrian Empire? Pete shrugged. The crystalline hive mind tried to eat our brains. The energy beings accidentally vaporized our communications array. The Temporal Syndicate keeps showing up at really inconvenient times. You folks have been pretty polite so far. Nancy nodded agreement. Plus, Admiral Corthon seems like a reasonable person once you get past all the formal Empire talk. I bet he'd be great at poker if he learned to relax a little. Sub-Commander Valtoris looked at Technical Specialist Viridian, who was frantically taking notes about human social dynamics. They exchanged a few words in their own language before Valtoris turned back to the humans. Chief Williams, he said quietly, may I ask you something about Zephyrian culture? Sure, what's on your mind? Do you find our imperial protocols and formal hierarchies to be excessive? Nancy considered this while shuffling the cards. Well, they're certainly impressive, but they seem like a lot of work. Don't you ever just want to sit down and have a normal conversation without all the ceremony? Valtoris was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he said finally, more than you might imagine. Well then, Nancy said, dealing another hand, how about we skip the ranks and titles for the rest of the game? Just people being people. For the first time since arriving, Sub-Commander Valtoris smiled. 2 weeks had passed since the cultural exchange began, and Captain Jake Morrison was starting to think the Zephyrians were having some kind of internal crisis. Their communications had become increasingly formal and tense, with multiple high-ranking officials appearing on screen for what seemed like emergency conferences. The situation became clear when Lieutenant Tom Bradley announced yet another incoming transmission, this one marked with priority codes that made the ship's translation. Systems work overtime? Captain, we're getting a transmission from someone called Grand Admiral Zex Morthanian, Tom said. The computer says that's roughly equivalent to Supreme Military Commander of everything. Jake straightened his uniform and walked to the center of the bridge. Put him through. The main screen filled with the image of the most impressive Zephyrian they had encountered yet. Grand Admiral Morthanian? stood nearly 8 feet tall with deep purple skin and 8 arms that moved in perfectly coordinated gestures. His uniform was less decorated than the others, but somehow managed to convey more authority through its simple elegance. "I am Grand Admiral Zex Morthanion, Supreme Commander of all Imperial military forces," he announced in a voice that sounded like distant thunder. "I have come personally to resolve this situation." "Hello, Grand Admiral," Jake replied pleasantly. "I'm Captain Morrison." "Nice to meet you." The Grand Admiral's golden eyes narrowed slightly, as if he had expected a different response. "Captain Morrison, my subordinates have filed reports that I find difficult to believe. They claim your species has somehow neutralized multiple galactic powers through non-military means." "Well, neutralized is a strong word," Jake said. "We prefer to think of it as making friends." "Making friends," the Grand Admiral repeated slowly. "With the hegemony of Krull?" "Sure, they're great people once you get to know them. They throw fantastic parties." Grand Admiral Morthanion gestured to someone off-screen, and the image split to show Admiral Corthon looking distinctly uncomfortable in what appeared to be the Discovery's recreation room. He was sitting at a small table across from Chief Petty Officer Nancy Williams, apparently in the middle of learning to play chess. "Admiral Corthon," the Grand Admiral said sternly, "explain why you are engaging in recreational activities with the enemy." Admiral Corthon moved a chess piece and looked up at the screen. "They are not the enemy, Grand Admiral. They are simply people who happen to live in space we thought was empty. They have refused to surrender to Imperial authority." "Yes, sir, but they have also offered to share their technology, cultural knowledge, and recreational activities in exchange for peaceful coexistence." Admiral Corthon moved another chess piece. "It is actually quite refreshing." "Grand Admiral." Morthanion's 8 arms began moving in what was clearly an agitated pattern. "This is unacceptable. The Empire does not engage in recreational activities with primitive species." Nancy Williams looked up from the chessboard with a puzzled expression. "Why not? Don't you guys ever just relax and have fun?" "Fun is not relevant to the expansion of Imperial authority," the Grand Admiral replied stiffly. "That sounds exhausting," Nancy said sympathetically. "No wonder you're all so tense." Before Grand Admiral Morthanion could respond, another ship appeared on the Discovery's sensors. Tom Bradley quickly identified it as a Terran Defense Force vessel, and within minutes Admiral Karen White was requesting permission to dock. Jake had worked with Admiral White before and knew she had a reputation for treating galactic politics like a friendly neighborhood dispute. She was a small woman with gray hair and laugh lines around her eyes, who somehow managed to command respect from alien civilizations that outgunned humanity 1,000 to 1. "Sorry I'm late," Admiral White said as she stepped onto the Discovery's bridge carrying a plastic container. "I brought brownies." "Are these the folks from the Zephyrian Empire?" Grand Admiral Morthanion stared at her with obvious confusion. "You are a military commander?" "Admiral Karen White, Terran Defense Force," she replied cheerfully, offering him the container. "Would you like a brownie? They're chocolate chip." "This is preposterous," the Grand Admiral declared. "Military commanders do not offer baked goods during first contact protocols. Why not?" Admiral White asked. "Food sharing is a universal sign of peaceful intentions. Most species appreciate the gesture." Captain Rick Stone's voice crackled over the communications system from his ship, the destroyer UFS Resolute. "Admiral White, we've got 3 more Zephyrian vessels approaching. Should I intercept?" "No need, Rick," she replied. "Just keep an eye on things. And see if you can get that asteroid targeting range set up again. The Hegemony delegation next week will want to test their new weapon systems." Grand Admiral Morthanion's golden eyes went wide. "You allow other species to test weapons in your territory?" "Sure," Admiral White said, settling into a chair with her brownies. "The Krull like to show off their new plasma cannons, and we like to see how our defensive systems handle different energy signatures. Everyone wins." "But that gives them intelligence about your capabilities," Admiral White laughed. "Grand Admiral, our capabilities are public knowledge. We've got detailed specifications available for download on our diplomatic networks. Transparency builds trust. Dr. Amy Rodriguez chose that moment to return from the Zephyrian flagship with Ensign Chris Murphy and a small group of alien cultural specialists. She was practically glowing with excitement and carrying what appeared to be several alien artifacts. "Captain, you'll never believe what I learned about Zephyrian social structures," she said breathlessly. "They have the most fascinating hierarchical system, but it's completely rigid. Nobody ever talks to anyone outside their rank level." "That does sound limiting," Jake observed. "Commander Corthanus gave me these cultural samples," Amy continued, displaying the artifacts. "But when I asked if lower-ranked personnel could contribute to cultural exchange, he looked at me like I had suggested something impossible. Grand." Admiral Morthanian drew himself up to his full impressive height. "Rank and hierarchy are essential to imperial order. Lower personnel do not have the authority to engage in cultural exchange. But they're the ones doing all the actual work," Chris pointed out. "The junior officers we met had way more interesting stories than the senior staff. Junior officers do not have stories. They follow orders." Admiral White looked genuinely puzzled. "How do you handle creative problem-solving if nobody below a certain rank can contribute ideas?" "Creative problem-solving is the responsibility of senior commanders." "That seems inefficient," Nancy Williams said, looking up from her chess game with Admiral Corthon. "What happens if a junior officer notices something important that the senior commanders missed?" Grand Admiral Morthanian appeared to be struggling with the concept. "Junior officers do not notice things that senior commanders miss." "But what if they do?" Amy pressed gently. "They do not." Admiral White exchanged glances with Jake Morrison. Both of them had dealt with rigid military hierarchies before, but this level of inflexibility was something new. "Grand Admiral," White said diplomatically, "would you be interested in observing a joint training exercise? We're scheduled to run defensive scenarios with several allied species next week." "What kind of scenarios?" "Oh, the usual," she said casually. "Asteroid deflection with the Crawl, network security with the Silicon Collective, temporal stabilization with the Syndicate folks, and psychic defense with the Altair Overmind." Grand Admiral Morthanian's 8 arms began moving in increasingly agitated patterns. "You conduct joint military exercises with multiple galactic powers simultaneously?" "Sure, it's more efficient that way. Plus everyone gets to learn new techniques." "But these civilizations are enemies of each other." "Not when they're working with us," Admiral White said with a shrug. "We've found that most conflicts happen because people don't talk to each other enough. Put everyone in the same room working on the same problem, and they usually figure out they have more in common than they thought." Dr. Amy Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically. "It's amazing how quickly species-wide prejudices disappear when individuals start interacting on a personal level." Grand Admiral Morthanian looked around the bridge at the mixed group of humans and Zephyrians who were chatting, playing games, and sharing food as if they had known each other for years. His golden eyes settled on Admiral Corthon, who was clearly enjoying his chess game with Nancy Williams. "This is not how galactic politics is supposed to work," he said weakly. "Why not?" asked Admiral White. "This seems much more pleasant than the conquest and subjugation approach." Grand Admiral Morthanian opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. For the first time since the conversation began, he appeared to be genuinely thinking rather than simply following protocol. "I will need to consult with the Imperial High Command," he said finally. "Take your time," Jake said. "We'll be here." As the transmission ended, Admiral White turned to Jake with a small smile. "I give it another week before they formally request to join our next diplomatic conference. You think so?" "Trust me," she said, biting into a brownie. "Once people discover that galactic politics doesn't have to involve threatening each other all the time, they usually want to stick around." 1 month after first contact, the situation had evolved far beyond anything Captain Jake Morrison could have predicted. The space around the Discovery now hosted not just the original Zephyrian fleet, but also ships from the hegemony of Crawl, 3 Silicon collective processing vessels, a temporal syndicate courier that kept flickering in and out of existence, and what appeared to be a crystallized energy construct that the energy beings called a diplomatic platform. The reason for this gathering was simple. Emperor Vex Supremus himself was coming to personally assess what his subordinates had started, calling the human problem. "Captain," Lieutenant Tom Bradley announced from his communications station, "we're receiving a transmission from the Imperial flagship. It's marked with every priority code in their system." Jake straightened his uniform and nodded. "Put it through." The main screen filled with the image of the most magnificent Zephyrian yet encountered. Emperor Supremus stood 12 feet tall with skin that shifted through every shade of blue and purple like living aurora. He had 12 arms that moved in, patterns so complex they seemed almost like dancing, and his golden eyes held depths that suggested centuries of absolute authority. "I am Emperor Vex Supremus, eternal ruler of the Zephyrian Galactic Empire, master of 10,000 worlds and supreme authority over all lesser species," he declared in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Hello, Your Majesty," Jake replied politely. "I'm Captain Morrison. Welcome to our little corner of space." The Emperor's 12 arms paused in their elaborate gestures. "You address me as an equal?" "Well, we're both people having a conversation," Jake said reasonably. "Seems like the polite thing to do." Before Emperor Supremus could respond, Dr. Amy Rodriguez appeared beside Jake carrying her ever-present notebook and practically vibrating with excitement. "Your Majesty, this is such an honor," she said brightly. "I've been studying Zephyrian governmental structures, and your empire's administrative systems are fascinating. The way you've managed to coordinate policy across such vast distances is really impressive." The Emperor blinked his golden eyes several times. "You have studied our governmental systems?" "Oh yes, Commander Corthanus was very helpful in explaining your hierarchical frameworks. Though I have to say I think there might be some inefficiencies in your information flow protocols that could be easily addressed." "Inefficiencies?" The Emperor repeated slowly. Admiral Corinne White chose that moment to dock with the Discovery, arriving with her usual cheerful energy and another container of baked goods. She walked onto the bridge as if meeting galactic emperors. Was something she did every Tuesday? "Sorry I'm late," she said, offering the container to Jake. "Traffic was terrible. The Krull delegation had engine trouble, and the Silicon collective ships kept trying to optimize everyone else's flight paths." Emperor Supremus stared at her with obvious bewilderment. "More military commanders bearing food offerings?" "Cookies." This time, Admiral White said helpfully, "Oatmeal raisin. And I'm not just military, I'm also head of the Terran Diplomatic Corps this week. We rotate positions to keep things interesting." "You rotate command positions?" "Sure, why wouldn't? We, different situations, need different skills. Jake here is great at exploration and first contact, but if we needed someone to negotiate mining rights, we'd probably call in Captain Lisa Park from the Commerce Division." Dr. Amy Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically. "It's much more flexible than rigid hierarchies. People can contribute their best skills where they're most needed." Emperor Supremus looked around the bridge, which now hosted not just humans but also several Zephyrian officers who had been participating in the ongoing cultural exchange. Admiral Corthan was teaching origami to Sub-Commander Valtoris, while Technical Specialist Viridian helped Chief Engineer Ben Cooper calibrate some equipment. "This is not how interspecies relations are conducted," the Emperor said, though his voice lacked the commanding authority it had held at the beginning of the conversation. "Why not?" asked Commander Paul Evans as he entered the bridge carrying a stack of routine paperwork. "Oh, hello there. You must be the Emperor." "I'm Paul Evans, just bringing Captain Morrison the weekly supply reports. We're running low on coffee again." Emperor Supremus watched in fascination as Paul handed Jake a datapad, exchanged a few casual words about crew schedules, and left without any of the elaborate protocols that would normally surround Imperial audiences. "Your subordinates approach you without ceremony," the Emperor observed. "Paul's not really my subordinate," Jake explained. "He runs supply operations for this sector. I just happen to be the captain of this particular ship. But you must have authority over him, Admiral White laughed. Jake's got about as much authority over Paul as I do over you, Your Majesty. We all just do our jobs and try to help each other out when needed. The Emperor's 12 arms began moving in slow, contemplative patterns. I came here to demand proof of your species' worthiness through trial by combat. Combat? Jake looked genuinely puzzled. Why would we want to fight you? To prove your strength and courage in the face of Imperial might. Dr. Amy Rodriguez looked up from her notes. Your Majesty, with all due respect, we already know you're strong and impressive. Your ships are beautiful, your technology is advanced, and your civilization has achieved remarkable things. Why would we need to prove anything through violence? Because that is how galactic hierarchies are established, the Emperor said, though. He sounded less certain than before. According to who? Admiral White asked curiously. The Emperor opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. His golden eyes took on a distant look, as if he was trying to remember something from long ago. It has always been this way, he said finally. But does it have to be? Asked a technical specialist Viridian, looking up from her work with Ben Cooper. I have learned much about human cooperation methods in the past month, and they seem far more efficient than our traditional approaches. Emperor Supremus turned to stare at his own officer with surprise. You question Imperial doctrine? I question whether Imperial doctrine serves Imperial interests, Viridian replied calmly. These humans have achieved in decades what we have failed to accomplish in centuries. Perhaps their methods have merit. Admiral Corthan stepped forward, still holding the origami crane he had been learning to fold. Your Majesty, I have spent considerable time observing human social structures. They accomplish through voluntary cooperation what we achieve through forced compliance, but with significantly less energy expenditure and much higher satisfaction rates among participants. You recommend that the Empire abandon its traditional methods? I recommend that the Empire consider alternative methods, Corthan said carefully. The humans have demonstrated that strength does not require domination, and authority does not require fear. Emperor Supremus looked around the bridge again, taking in the relaxed atmosphere and the mixed groups of humans and Zephyrians working together on various projects. His gaze settled on Captain Morrison, who was calmly reviewing Paul Evans' supply reports while monitoring the conversation. Captain Morrison, the Emperor said slowly, what would you do if I ordered the Imperial fleet to withdraw and never contact your species again? Jake looked up from his paperwork with a slight smile. Well, Your Majesty, I'd probably say that was your choice to make and wish you well in your future endeavors. And if I demanded that humanity submit to Imperial rule, I'd politely decline and suggest we find a more mutually beneficial arrangement. And if I challenged you to personal combat to settle the matter? Jake considered this seriously. I'd probably ask why you thought violence was necessary, and see if we could figure out what you really wanted through conversation instead. Emperor Supremus was quiet for a long moment, his 12 arms moving in slow, almost meditative patterns. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its imperial thunder and sounded almost uncertain. What if what I really want is to understand how your species has achieved such widespread acceptance among galactic civilizations without conquest or intimidation? Dr. Amy Rodriguez beamed with delight. Oh, that's easy to explain. Would you like to attend our Galactic Cooperation Conference next month? We're hosting representatives from 47 different species to discuss trade, cultural exchange, and collaborative problem-solving. 47 species? Well, 53 if you count the different factions of the Temporal Syndicate separately, Admiral White added, though they're still arguing about which timeline gets to send the primary delegation. Emperor Supremus stared at them for several seconds. You are inviting the Zephyrian Empire to participate in a galactic diplomatic conference? Sure, Jake said with a shrug. You seem like interesting people, and I bet you'd have valuable perspectives to contribute. Even after I threatened to conquer your species? Hey, everyone's got to start somewhere, Nancy Williams called out from across the bridge where she was teaching poker to a group of mixed human and Zephyrian crew members. The Krull tried to strip mine our solar system, and now they're our best trading partners. Emperor Supremus looked at his own officers, who were clearly hoping he would accept the invitation. He looked at the humans, who seemed genuinely pleased at the prospect of including the Zephyrian Empire in their diplomatic network.